Hello Internet! This week I dove face first into Diablo 3 for Season 26. Now I wanted to revisit this game, fully complete the achievement style season journey, and of course slay some murderous demons. So let's talk about this game, my experience fully completing things, the rewards for doing so, and see if Diablo 3 is worth revisiting in 2022. Now way back in 2012, also known as the year that the world was supposed to end, there came the release of one of the most anticipated titles of all time, that would be Diablo 3. Now in my circle of friends, literally every person I knew that played video games was waiting for this release. They were Diablo 2 people, and they had been waiting 11 years for a follow-up title. And then on May 15th, 2012, just about 10 years ago, as of the time of this video's release, Diablo 3 hit store shelves. Now it showed up for the PS3 and the Xbox 360 about a year later, and it has subsequently been released on other platforms as well. So the question is, was it good? Did it live up to expectations? Is it worth revisiting in 2022? And frankly, it's impossible to talk about Diablo 3 without also talking about Diablo 2. Now, right up front, I did not play Diablo 2 very much. I did play the game, but it was only for a few hours back when I was a teenager. It's on my bucket list, but I just never really got around to playing it. I don't have the deep love of the franchise that a lot of other people seem to have, but I can still appreciate it for what it was and for the major impact that it had on the industry. And oh yeah, Diablo 2 influenced gaming. Now, people always seem to use the terms ARPG when referring to games like Diablo, but let's be real, they should be called Diablo-likes. We have roguelikes, we should probably just call these games Diablo-likes. In the decades since the release of the original Diablo, there have been countless titles that fit into this genre. Nox is a title that gets thrown around a lot. It slightly predated Diablo 2, and apparently it's a huge fan favorite. Now, Throne of Darkness is another older title that literally no one ever mentions, but I remember it fondly from a demo that I had when I was a child. Nowadays, most of the Diablo 2 stans have found love for Grim Dawn and Path of Exile, but there have been plenty of others. And now that we have GOG and Steam and, Battle.net, you can pick up all of these classics for pretty cheap. Not to mention the myriad of indie games that you can happen upon if you're browsing something like Steam Peak looking for other games in the genre. Now, regardless of clones and successors, Diablo is often forgotten in lieu of discussing Diablo 2. And there's a pretty good reason for that. Diablo was an unrefined gem, but Diablo 2 took everything from the first game and expanded it. There's more skills, more depth, more levels, and just a god-awful amount of loot, and people were instantly captivated by the Diablo franchise. This was enhanced even further by the ability to play this game online. When I talk to people about Diablo 2, that is what inevitably comes up. Playing the game is one thing, but playing it online, trading items with other real human beings, it took it to a whole other level. Anyway, this video is about Diablo 3, just, in case you forgot. Also, the world didn't end in 2012, just to, in case you were wondering. So with all of that talk about Diablo 2 out of the way, hopefully you understand why Diablo 3 was one of the fastest and best-selling games of all time. There was a lot of hype surrounding its release, and it had big shoes to fill. So the question is, did it live up to that hype? And honestly, there's not exactly an easy answer to this. It depends on how you view success. Most of the hardcore Diablo 2 players that I knew were pretty unhappy with Diablo 3. They would say that it was too casual. But I also knew a lot of people who played Diablo 3 as their first game in the franchise, and it inarguably had very broad appeal. It went on to become literally one of the best-selling games of all time, and honestly, even my friends who hated it, they still picked up the game and played through it multiple times. Now, the real shine, though, of Diablo 3 was that ability to appeal to first-time players. My girlfriend at the time had never played a game like this, but she became absolutely obsessed with Diablo 3. I remember having to explain to her one of the loading screens or something in the game had hinted at a cow level, so we actually talked it out, and she was super happy when she finally made it there herself. However, it does need to be said that many people who were fans of Diablo 2 were disappointed with this release. We have all been there. We've all experienced games that we were excited for only to be seriously disappointed. I'm looking at you, Resident Evil 6, and also Duke Nukem Forever. And also Mass Effect Andromeda. Actually, I have quite a few of these in my brain, so maybe we should just move on. Diablo 3, as I said, was a massive success in terms of units that were sold. It is near the top of the list for best-selling games of all time, and there were plenty of people that dove into this game, myself included. The game did appeal to many people, but in terms of fans of the franchise, it seemed like a lot of them were pretty disappointed. No one really hated Diablo 3, it just seemed like the common theme among fans of the franchise was that it failed to capture the magic of the previous game. Diablo 3 continued the story and the lore, which was great and interesting, but in terms of building your character, people complained that things were too simplified. The skill trees from Diablo 2 were removed in favor of plug-and-play skills. You could freely swap between them, and each main skill ability had 5 runes that allowed you to augment that skill. You could also select 4 passive skills, and all of these things slowly unlocked as you leveled your character, but many people regarded this as an oversimplification. In fact, when I told people that I was playing Diablo 3 for a video, that was the #1 complaint that I heard. People don't seem to remember this game very fondly, and that included me. I didn't think I would enjoy coming back to it. But most of them said to me that it was too simplified, it was too aimed at casual players instead of the hardcore player base that had made the franchise a success in the first place. And although I'm not one of those people, I do understand why they would feel that way. Plus, there was the whole fiasco with like a real money auction house in the game, which I don't even know what to say to this, what a genuinely terrible idea that was. Also, and you really can't make a video without mentioning this, Blizzard, well, it's hard to talk about. I won't go into any detail here, but Blizzard has become a very controversial company over the last few years. Back when I was a teenager and in my early 20s, Blizzard was regarded very highly. Between World of Warcraft, Diablo, Overwatch, Hearthstone, and StarCraft, they came up a lot when you talked about the greatest games in those particular genres, but as time passed, things have gone downhill. And I wanted to be clear that I have issues with the company as a whole, even if I am making a video about one of their games. If you're interested in learning more about the various controversies, I'd like to point you towards another YouTube channel called Taliesin and Evitel. They primarily cover World of Warcraft, but they've had several videos where they discuss the state of Blizzard as a company in recent years, as well as all of the allegations and things like that. But anyway, all of that out of the way, let's talk about my progress through Season 26, completing the seasonal journey, yada yada, etc. So first of all, if you want to come back to Diablo 3 at any point, I highly recommend doing so at the start of a new season. This allows you to make a seasonal character. They will start with nothing, they'll have an empty stash, you'll have to upgrade all of the vendors again, so on and so forth. This means that even if you previously demolished the game, you will be starting with a clean slate. Now the way the season is structured is that you start off with a big list of stuff to do. These are broken down into categories, and each time you finish a category, you will get some sort of reward, and then you move on to the next set of challenges. Some of the rewards are completely pointless, like the frames that go around your character's portrait, but if you complete the whole season, there's usually some sort of cosmetic reward. This season, Season 26, if you complete everything, you get a cute little pet holding a lollipop that collects gold off the ground so you don't have to. Now at first, I thought that these objectives would give me some direction and something to work towards, but really most of them are easily obtained just by leveling up your character and getting to endgame content. Out of the several dozen objectives, there were maybe only 5 or 6 things that I specifically had to target, and that was mostly just grinding to get certain things at the end of my run. However, that is better than them not existing at all. I'm someone who responds pretty well to having objectives, and in fact, I would not have played Diablo 3 as long as I did if I didn't have an end goal like this. Prior to starting the season, I had heard that both monks and demon hunters were really strong builds this season, so I chose to be a monk. I've never really played a monk before. I was definitely a demon hunter main when I played like 7, 8, 9 years ago, so I rolled a monk and got started on my season journey. So the first goal really is just to get to level 70, that's the highest level in the game. That is when all of your skills and whatnot become fully unlocked, which, obviously I want to do that so I can get to my end game build. Now the first 2 groups of challenges were very straightforward. The idea is that as you level up to 70, you would automatically complete almost all of these things. And this is really important because the other main reward for completing these sections are set items, which you really are not going to get until you're max level anyway. Set items, if you don't know, these are items that get more powerful as you wear more items from that specific set. For monks, this was the Inna set, which significantly increased the power of our water elementals. We weren't really able to complete this until after level 70, so we would have that strong gear going into the end game. So actually leveling up wasn't too bad. It took me about 8 hours to reach max level, which is a ridiculously long time compared to most people who would be playing this season. There's a special thing you can do called a challenge rift that gives you a lot of currency, which you can then use to get some very powerful gear even though it's your seasonal character. That means that even at level 1 you can be incredibly overpowered, and that didn't feel very fun to me, so I decided to level the old-fashioned way and just find all of the gear that I wanted. Now I also, admittedly, I did not do things in the most optimal way. I mostly just played to have a good time, and I saw some videos where people went from 1 to 70 in like an hour, which, you know, to me is crazy. So leveling up took me a pretty long time, probably a lot longer than it would take you, whoever is watching this. But I did ultimately manage to fully upgrade my vendors, I was crafting gear as I went, and overall I had a pretty good time. Towards the end, as I was level like 65 or so, this did start to wear me down. I'd already done all of the bosses at that point, I wasn't quite to end game, so I felt pretty blah about the grinding. Thankfully though, when I did hit level 70, pretty much everything changed. I started gathering my end game gear, and my character began to really ramp up in power, just out of control. See, the build that I chose was called In a Monk, and the idea with this character is that we summon these blue allies, and then when I use one of my abilities, they all turn into waves of water. These waves will radiate out from my character, targeting enemies, and they just really chew them up. And there's one specific item called the Crudest Boots that lets them stay in their wave form basically forever. And the inner gear set itself raises my max number of allies up to 10, so now I get 10 of these tidal wave spewing companions. So basically my gameplay went like this. I would press right click to pull all enemies towards me, and this deals damage, so it multiplies the allies that I have around my character all the way up until I have 10 of them. Then I press E, which converts all of these allies into their tidal wave form, and then basically everything around me dies. If I find something particularly tanky, I can continue right clicking to vortex pull them to my character, and that vortex makes them take double damage from my tidal waves. So once I had a few of these, you know, powerful items and started to stack up damage multipliers, my character became a powerhouse. Almost as soon as I hit level 70, I was running Greater Rifts, which is like the pinnacle end game content, and I went right to Torment 16, which is the highest difficulty. I started increasing Greater Rifts beyond that up to around level 90. I could have pushed a lot farther, but I just wasn't enjoying them anymore. At that point, everything just had too much HP. It just became a really slow process, so I lowered the difficulty slightly to make the end game grinding a little bit easier. But yeah, at that point, I had basically, I won the game, right? I died several times while I was leveling my character, but once I hit 70, I don't think I ever died again. I was just too powerful. And to be clear, that is not because I'm super good at Diablo 3, it's just that this is an incredibly overpowered build. By then, I was focusing on polishing off all of the season challenges. Now again, most of these were really straightforward and easy things. Since I was already playing on maximum difficulty, most of the challenges that involved like killing a specific boss they were very easy. There were really only a few challenges that held me up. For example, one of them is to complete a set dungeon. Now a set dungeon in Diablo 3 is a dungeon that's only available when you're wearing a specific gear set. These dungeons each have their own specific requirements. For me, basically all I had to do was activate my tidal wave ability while surrounded by 10 enemies on 5 separate occasions. Now the problem with that is that my character was monstrously powerful, so I went into the dungeon and just steamrolled everything and failed the challenge. I actually had to nerf my damage down to about a sixth of what it normally was. I also had to remove the gear that let my allies exist forever in their waveform. It wasn't actually difficult at all. I completed the dungeon on my second attempt, but forcing me to nerf my build surprised me and actually kind of made me angry. I don't really see why I would build my character into a superhero and then have to rein them in order to complete endgame content. I think forcing people to nerf their builds is a terrible design choice, and I kind of can't believe it's in the game. The last few challenges I completed were not difficult at all. They just required me to run dozens and dozens of Greater Rifts to level up legendary gems. At most, running these rifts, I would get 5 levels on any given gem in each run, and I needed to level 3 of those gems to level 70, so, you know, there was quite a bit of grind here. I also needed to extract legendary item powers into my cube. I needed at least 40 of them for a challenge, which, you know, if you're not a Diablo player, basically that just means that I absorbed the powers from a legendary item so I could use them as a passive bonus for my character. But in order to do things with the cube, you actually need to have materials that come from running random objectives. These are called bounties, and each act actually gives you different materials, and you don't get the materials unless you complete 5 of those objectives in one sitting. Now again, this wasn't actually difficult, it was just a grind. For my powerful monk, each objective took anywhere from like 30 seconds to maybe 3 or 4 minutes. The problem is that this really adds up over time and added a lot of time to my actual playthrough. This was the same issue with augmenting my most powerful items. I went through hundreds of gems just to get this augmentation, and it was in fact the last objective I completed in my journey. In the end though, most of this stuff was very easy, it just took time. When I decided to play Diablo 3 again, I thought I could bang this out over the course of a single weekend. I remember the game being pretty casual, and I knew I had picked one of the easier builds. And I'm sure that for seasoned players, they could have done all of this in less than 6 or 7 hours, maybe even significantly less time. But for me, it turned into a pretty long grind, and by the end, I wasn't really having fun anymore. Now, regardless of all of that though, I did complete my season journey. In the end, I received quite a few portrait borders, which again are terrible rewards, and I think it's absolutely silly that this is what you get. But I also got the main draw of completing this season, which is this lovely little pet. It's a little demon holding a big old lollipop, and his name is Philip Seymour Hoffman, and I love him. So let's talk about numbers. While playing this season of Diablo 3, I died around 11 times. I forgot to keep track of that, so this is just an estimate. I completed 82 rifts while grinding to level up my legendary gems. I completed 178 bounties to get my endgame cube materials. I collected nearly 2 billion pieces of gold and obliterated about 79,000 enemies and 2,700 elites. Now this whole season journey took me around 28.5 hours, and as I said, this time was mostly because I did things suboptimally. I get bored very easily, so I would end up going and doing other things in the game even though they weren't a priority. Anyone who follows a guide or does the challenge rift at the start of the season for those rewards could easily have this time. Even as a casual player, you're not going to have a hard time with this, and I'm sure the hardcore players could churn all of this out in very little time. Now with all of that out of the way, is Diablo 3 worth revisiting in 2022 or worth coming back for completing Season 26? The answer is, I don't know, why are you asking me? Look, it depends, okay? I was genuinely surprised by how much I enjoyed this process. There were moments where it was a drag, and yeah, there's grind to it, but most people who come in playing these sort of games expect to do some grinding. There is a shocking amount of polish in this game. Changing builds is smooth, gathering gear sets was relatively easy, and I really like that there's transmog. But if you're looking for depth, well, no, this game is pretty casual, but honestly, I sort of liked the simplicity of it. Sometimes I look at the Path of Exile build tree and I have a mini aneurysm. If you're looking for a hardcore, challenging gameplay, you mostly won't find it here. But there is a reason that Diablo 3 is one of the best-selling games of all time. It's not just hyped for the franchise, it's extremely accessible. It's easy to pick up and play. There are clear character builds and simple but satisfying gameplay. Most of the mechanics are straightforward and are really obvious. For instance, enemies that place dangerous terrain like slime or fire are very clear and easy to see in Diablo 3. However, when I play something like Path of Exile, I often can't tell when there's bad terrain underneath me, but in Diablo this is clear and easy to recognize. All of the mechanics are super obvious and easily understood even by a brand new player. There's also enough variety in the builds that you could play multiple characters without experiencing the same kind of gameplay. However, the game's casual nature will be a turnoff for a lot of people, not to mention the fact that the seasonal rewards have just never been very good. Even looking at a list of the old season rewards, I'm pretty shocked by how bad they are. If you compare this to more modern games that hand out cosmetics like they're candy, Diablo just can't compete. Which does make sense, right? It's a 10-year-old game and it has nowhere near the population compared to something like Path of Exile. There's no microtransactions or anything to continue bringing money in, so of course they don't put resources into developing cosmetic rewards. So in the end, I think Diablo 3 is a pretty mixed bag. Ultimately, I did find the gameplay to be pretty fun, even if it did become tedious at the end of the game. There's enough here for you to have a pretty good time, at least for a little while. Frankly, I'm pretty shocked by how good the game is. I thought I would come back to this and absolutely hate it. Instead, I mostly enjoyed myself and was pretty surprised by how polished the game feels even compared to more modern entries in the genre. But anyway, that's pretty much all I've got for Diablo 3. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Maybe hit that like button if you did. And yeah, thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.